To catch up on the previous parts of this story, just check the links waiting for you in the description.
Chapter 1, The Morning Without Birds. It began in Hangzhou on an ordinary Tuesday. Li Wei noticed it before anyone else in his apartment building. He was standing on his balcony on the 22nd floor, watching the sun rise through a pale orange haze. Normally the mornings were alive, sparrows arguing in the trees below, the distant roar of traffic on the expressway, the faint rumble of airplanes descending toward Shashan Airport. That morning, the trees moved, but the sky did not speak. The branches swayed gently in the wind, yet there was no rush of air above the rooftops. No birds cut across the skyline. No faint engine hum stitched the distance together. The city made noise at street level. Scooters buzzed. Vendors shouted. A bus exhaled at the curb, but everything above the height of the buildings felt sealed. Li Wei tilted his head upward. The sky looked endless, blue, and harmless. It felt close, too close. Chapter 2, The 100-meter ceiling. By noon, videos were spreading across Weibo. Pilots reported something impossible. Once their aircraft climbed past roughly 30 meters, engine noise seemed to vanish from the ground. Air traffic control confirmed that while radar and telemetry remained intact, microphones positioned on high towers captured nothing from above a precise vertical boundary. Meteorologists at the Zhejiang Provincial Weather Bureau released a cautious statement. Weather balloons transmitted temperature, humidity, and pressure normally, but their audio sensors stopped detecting atmospheric movement at exactly 31 meters. 31 meters below that height, wind could be heard above it. Silence. The measurements were repeated in Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen. The numbers changed slightly with terrain, but the effect was identical. Sound did not travel upward beyond a fixed boundary. It simply ended. Chapter 3, The Test. The central government ordered controlled experiments outside Chengdu. A sealed testing range prepared a vertical detonation tower equipped with high-speed microphones and pressure sensors. The explosion was scheduled for 14:00. Li Wei watched the state broadcast from his office, along with half the country. The countdown felt ceremonial. When the charge detonated, the blast rippled outward with familiar force. The shockwave rolled across the ground, rattling distant windows. Dust rose in a violent bloom, but above the tower, the fire expanded in perfect, unnatural quiet. Engineers replayed the footage repeatedly. Horizontally, the explosion roared. Vertically, it was as though an invisible lid had swallowed the thunder. The smoke climbed until it struck something unseen. It flattened at the top, spreading sideways like breath against glass. In the control room, no one spoke, because for the first time, they were certain this was not atmospheric interference. Something was absorbing the sky. Chapter 4, Distortion. That night in Beijing, astronomers at the National Astronomical Observatories began noticing subtle anomalies in starlight. The distortion was slight, barely measurable, but consistent across telescopes. Light bending, just enough to suggest curvature, but not the curvature of Earth. The bending was coming from above the atmosphere, above the silent boundary. Satellite imaging returned incomplete data. Signals transmitted downward without issue, but certain upward frequencies were dampened. It was as if the planet had been placed inside a transparent dome that swallowed vibration. Li Wei stepped outside again around midnight. The city lights shimmered below him. The sky was clear, yet the silence pressed downward like depth underwater. He had the sudden, irrational sensation that something immense was suspended just beyond sight, not invading, not descending, just waiting. Chapter 5, The Drone. A private aerospace startup in Shenzhen volunteered to send a high-altitude drone equipped with optical and acoustic sensors. The livestream attracted tens of millions of viewers across China. The drone ascended smoothly from an industrial rooftop. 10 meters. 20. 30. 31 meters, the audio feed thinned abruptly. The hum of rotors faded as if submerged. 32 meters, total silence. The video continued flawlessly. The sky was wide and blue. Thin clouds drifted lazily. Then the drone reached 100 meters, the clouds above it changed, they stopped behaving like vapor. Instead of dispersing, they flattened, spreading laterally as though pressed against a curved surface. The drone climbed higher. At 200 meters, the camera flickered. For a fraction of a second, something enormous interrupted the blue, not solid, not defined, but curved. A shadow without darkness. Then the feed cut to black. Across China, millions of viewers stared at their screens, replaying that final frame. It wasn't the silence that terrified them, it was the shape hiding inside it. Chapter 6, Airspace closed within 48 hours. China closed all civilian airspace below emergency threshold. Airports in Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Beijing filled with grounded aircraft, line wing to wing like abandoned birds. Official statements described it as a temporary atmospheric anomaly. Unofficially, pilots refused to fly. One captain from Air China reported that at 300 meters his engines became visually operational but acoustically non-existent. Inside the cockpit, alarms functioned. Outside, the world heard nothing. He described it as flying inside a vacuum that existed only above the aircraft. The military tested fighter jets over the Gobi Desert. Observers on the ground watched supersonic passes that produced no sonic boom. No thunder followed lightning storms in Yunnan that night. The sky had lost its voice completely, and without its voice, it began to feel artificial. Chapter 7, The Animals. The first riots were not human. In rural Sichuan, farmers reported livestock refusing to graze. Chickens huddled indoors long past sunrise. Dogs howled continuously but only when facing upward, as if responding to something beyond hearing range. In Hangzhou, flocks of pigeons launched suddenly from rooftops and then scattered chaotically, unable to settle. Many collided midair as though disoriented. At the Chengdu panda base, usually calm animals paced in agitation, staring at the ceiling of their enclosures even when outside. Li Wei noticed the neighborhood stray cats had vanished. The courtyard below his apartment felt abandoned. Something in the natural world understood before humans did. Something was pressing down on them. Chapter 8, The Measurement. 3 days after the first silence, Beijing authorized a classified experiment at the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center. Instead of measuring sound from the ground, they would generate it from above. A small rocket was launched carrying an autonomous acoustic emitter programmed to broadcast a continuous multi-frequency pulse downward as it ascended. For the first 30 meters, receivers on the ground detected the signal clearly. At 31 meters, it weakened. At 32, the downward transmission ceased. But telemetry showed something impossible. The emitter continued broadcasting, energy was leaving the device. It simply wasn't reaching Earth. The signal was being intercepted between the emitter and the surface, not deflected, consumed. Chapter 9, The Curvature. Astronomers escalated their findings to the central government that evening. Using combined arrays from FAST and Guizhou and orbital data from international partners, they mapped gravitational lensing distortions. The data outlined a contour not spherical, not flat. A vast, shallow curve stretching thousands of kilometers centered over East Asia. Its density was inconsistent, fluctuating in faint rhythmic pulses, as though breathing. Li Wei watched leaked diagrams spread briefly online before censorship erased them. But screenshots remained. The curve did not resemble a dome enclosing Earth. It resembled the underside of something enormous, hovering. Chapter 10, The Hum. On the sixth night, Li Wei couldn't sleep. The silence above the city had begun to feel heavier than noise. Even the wind seemed confined to street level, scraping along buildings but never rising. Around 2:17 a.m., he felt something in his chest, not a sound. A vibration, low, subtle, almost internal. He sat upright. The glass of water beside his bed trembled faintly, though there was no earthquake warning on his phone. Across social media, scattered reports appeared describing the same sensation. A deep, bone-level resonance felt mostly after midnight. Seismographs across western China registered micro-oscillations too uniform to be tectonic. The rhythm repeated every 11 seconds. It did not come from the ground. It came from above, and for the first time, the silence was no longer empty. It was full of something feeding. Chapter 11, The Sky Shout. On the eighth day, the government did something unprecedented. At exactly 12 o'clock Beijing time, sirens, factory horns, ship fog signals, stadium speakers, and emergency broadcast systems across China were activated simultaneously. The operation was unofficially named Sky Shout. If something was absorbing sound, scientists wanted to measure its reaction to saturation. Li Wei stood on his balcony as the city inhaled, then the noise began. A wall of sound erupted across Hangzhou, metallic, mechanical, primal. Across the nation, mountains echoed with sirens. Coastal ships blasted horns toward the clouds. Millions of people screamed upward, horizontally. The sound was overwhelming. Vertically, it vanished, but 30 seconds into the experiment, every seismic station in China registered a spike, not from the ground, from above. The 11-second pulse shortened to 8. It was responding. Chapter 12, The Drop. Satellite imaging that night confirmed what scientists feared. The curvature had lowered, only by a few meters, but uniformly. It was subtle enough that no eye could see the descent. But laser measurements taken from skyscraper rooftops showed the boundary of silence now hovering at 29 meters in several provinces. It was coming down. Air pressure remained stable. Oxygen levels unchanged. The sky still looked empty, yet the invisible ceiling was descending centimeter by centimeter. Li Wei rode the elevator to the lobby and felt it, the strange awareness that something massive had moved closer while no one was looking. Above the 20th floor now, balconies sat in perfect acoustic dead zones. The upper half of his building no longer had a sky that made sound. Chapter 13. The coastline along the eastern coast near Shanghai, fishermen reported the sea behaving strangely. The surface remained calm, but sonar readings showed chaotic turbulence in the upper layers, as if marine life were fleeing upward and then stopping abruptly. Dead fish began washing ashore by the thousands. Autopsies revealed ruptured swim bladders, as though pressure had shifted violently above them, but the ocean floor showed no quake activity. Tide gauges detected a slow but measurable rise in mean sea level, not dramatic, not yet alarming, but steady. Oceanographers whispered a theory no one wanted to publish. If something massive hovered above, its gravitational influence could be subtle but global. The thing in the sky was not just absorbing sound, it had weight. Chapter 14. The internal sound hospitals across Beijing and Chongqing began documenting patients complaining of insomnia, vertigo, and auditory hallucinations, except they weren't hallucinations. EEG scans showed synchronized neural activity spikes every 8 seconds, matching the new pulse measured by seismic stations. The vibration wasn't traveling through air. It was traveling through matter, through buildings, through bone, through Wei. Night, lying still, he could almost anticipate the rhythm before it came. A low internal tremor, like distant thunder that never arrived. Some people described it as breathing, others called it chewing. Chapter 15. The archive. Li Wei worked in data systems for a provincial infrastructure bureau. On the 10th day, he received access to a restricted archive flagged for anomaly review. The files dated back nearly 18 months. Subtle atmospheric acoustic dampening had been detected long before the silence became absolute. At first it was dismissed as instrument drift, then as rare temperature inversion effects, but the pattern was consistent. Something had been forming above Earth for over a year, growing, condensing, feeding quietly on every rocket launch, every supersonic jet, every thunderstorm. The silence wasn't an arrival, it was the final stage of something that had already been here. Li Wei stared at a simulation rendering buried in the classified data. It showed Earth wrapped not in a dome, but beneath the vast underside of a living structure, and the structure was not hovering randomly. It was centered precisely over the densest concentrations of human activity. As if drawn to vibration. As if cultivated by it. Chapter 16. The lowering. By the 12th day, the boundary had fallen below most rooftops in Shanghai and Guangzhou. In parts of Beijing, it hovered barely 20 meters above the ground. High-rise residents found themselves living inside vertical pockets of absolute acoustic death. On Li Wei's balcony, even his own voice thinned if he raised his chin while speaking. Children discovered it first as a game. They would shout upward from playgrounds and laugh when their voices clipped strangely, as though sliced in half. Parents did not laugh. Government measurements confirmed the descent was accelerating. The invisible ceiling was no longer drifting. It was lowering with intention, and the 11-second pulse had shortened again, now every 6 seconds. Chapter 17. The black noon. The revelation came during a partial solar eclipse visible across western China. Telescopes were already aligned when astronomers noticed something impossible. As the moon slid across the sun, a second curvature became visible, not dark like the moon, but distorting light around it. A colossal arc eclipsed the eclipse, a faint boundary bending sunlight into a shimmering crescent far larger than any celestial body should appear. For 7 seconds, the outline clarified. It was not smooth. It was textured, layered, like overlapping membranes stretching across the sky. Then the light shifted, and it vanished again into transparency, but the image had been recorded. Humanity had finally seen the edge of it, and it was alive. Chapter 18. The second shout. Despite warnings, authorities initiated a second sky shout, this time amplified globally through cooperation with other nations. The idea was desperate: overload it. If it fed on vibration, perhaps excess would destabilize it. At 1800 hours Beijing time, synchronized detonations were triggered in remote regions. Naval fleets blasted horns toward the heavens. Stadium speakers roared. Millions screamed again. Li Wei felt the vibration build through the pavement beneath his feet. For 3 seconds, nothing changed, then the pulse from above stopped, not slowed, stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like suffocation, and then something pushed back. Every glass surface in Hangzhou shattered simultaneously. Chapter 19. The pressure wave. The counterforce was not sound. It was pressure. An invisible downward surge flattened trees across entire districts. People were thrown to the ground as if gravity had briefly intensified. The boundary dropped another 3 meters instantly across China. buildings groaned under a force that had no wind and no noise. Seismographs recorded the event as originating above the atmosphere. Hospitals flooded with injuries from falling debris, and then, just as abruptly, the force ceased, the pulse resumed. Now every 4 seconds, IT had not been harmed, IT had been irritated. Chapter 20, The Realization. In emergency meetings broadcast behind closed doors, physicists reached a horrifying consensus: the structure was not merely absorbing sound, it was converting vibrational energy into mass. Each global attempt to disrupt it had fed it exponentially. Its descent was not accidental, it was growth. Li Wei returned to his apartment that night and found something new. The air above the streetlights shimmered faintly, as though heat rose from invisible skin just meters overhead. He reached upward instinctively from the sidewalk. At approximately 18 meters, his raised metal antenna rod struck resistance, not solid, but elastic. It flexed slightly, then pushed back. For the first time, humanity had touched the sky, and the sky had answered. Chapter 21, Contact. The footage spread before it could be erased. In Wuhan, a construction crane operator extended a steel cable upward until it met resistance at roughly 16 meters. The cable bowed as if pressed against thick rubber. Workers below watched in stunned silence as the line vibrated against something unseen. Then the surface rippled, and not from the crane, from within. A slow wave traveled across the invisible membrane, distorting the air like water trembling under a drop of rain. The cable snapped violently, recoiling downward for a fraction of a second. The membrane became visible, translucent, veined, layered like muscle beneath glass. It healed where the cable had pressed, and continued descending. Chapter 22, Ground Zero. In low-lying rural areas outside Changsha, the boundary reached the earth first. Farmers described the moment as a horizon folding downward. The space above their fields shimmered, then settled only 2 meters overhead. Birds attempting to fly struck at midair and fell. Sound changed instantly. Shouts became trapped, echoing sideways but never rising. Gunshots fired upward were muffled as though pressed into flesh. By nightfall, entire villages existed inside shallow acoustic cavities barely tall enough to stand in. Above the membrane, faint movement could be seen, vast shadows sliding across a dim, organic underside. The sky was no longer distant. It was grazing rooftops. Chapter 23, The Breach Attempt. The military authorized a final physical test in the Gobi Desert, far from dense population. A vertical missile was launched not to explode, but to pierce. It struck the membrane at high velocity. For one breathless moment, it penetrated. Sensors transmitted chaos, pressure fluctuations, internal resonance, an environment not vacuum but dense and fluidic. Then the opening sealed. The missile vanished, not falling back, not exploding, absorbed. Seconds later, the entire membrane pulsed outward, and the boundary across northern China dropped another meter. The cost of touching it had increased. Its growth. It was not a barrier, it was tissue. Chapter 24, The Li Wei barely slept now. The pulse every 4 seconds had synchronized with his heartbeat until he could no longer distinguish which rhythm was his own. Reviewing archived satellite data, he noticed something overlooked. The membrane center was shifting westward, toward the Tibetan Plateau, toward thinner atmosphere, toward lower human density. It was not hunting cities, it was redistributing weight. As if preparing to settle. A theory formed in his mind, fragile and horrifying. What if it was not descending to crush humanity? What if it was descending to rest? Chapter 25, The First Tear. The first permanent tear appeared above Chongqing. Without warning, a section of membrane thinned and split open like parted curtains. Through the rupture, humanity saw beyond the underside for the first time. It was not stars, it was not spaced, it was structured layer upon layer of colossal organic mass stretching upward beyond sight, illuminated by faint bioluminescent veins pulsing in rhythm with the global tremor. The tear widened for 11 seconds. Something enormous shifted behind it. I would be too simple a word. A cavity. A sensor. A continent-sized organ turning slowly. Then the tear sealed across China. Millions fell to their knees, not from faith, but from vertigo, because the truth was undeniable. Earth was not beneath an object. It was beneath a body, and that body was waking. Chapter 26, The Acceleration. After the tear above Chongqing, the pulse changed again. 0.3 seconds across China, people began collapsing without visible cause. The human body is a system of rhythms: electrical, muscular, neural. Now another rhythm pressed into it, overriding sleep cycles, spiking anxiety, disrupting equilibrium. Hospitals reported synchronized cardiac irregularities occurring precisely with each descending tremor. Glass vibrated in cabinets. Water in pipes quivered. Even concrete seemed to hum faintly, as though resonating with a frequency too low to hear. The boundary in Hangzhou lowered to just above street lamp height. Li Wei could now see it clearly at sunset, a faint distortion like oil across the sky, its surface trembling with slow internal tides. It was no longer hiding, it was settling. Chapter 27, The Wake gravity readings from observatories in Qinghai and Tibet confirmed the unthinkable. Earth's gravitational constant had shifted by a fraction so small it would have once gone unnoticed. But globally averaged, it was undeniable. Mass had increased, not Earth's mass, the mass above it. Tidal patterns along the eastern seaboard intensified. Shanghai's seawalls strained against surges that arrived without storms. The Pacific appeared subtly lifted, drawn upward toward the hovering body. Oceanographers issued a quiet internal memo: if the descent continued, coastal China would not drown from rain, it would rise toward the sky. Chapter 28, The Archive. Beneath the archive, Li Wei gained access to deeper classified files, buried behind layers of military encryption. They were older than expected, dating back decades. In 1987, atmospheric researchers had recorded unexplained acoustic absorption during a rocket test. The anomaly was dismissed as equipment error. In 2008, during the Beijing Olympics, a temporary distortion disrupted satellite telemetry for less than 2 seconds. Classified. In 2023, a pattern emerged correlating global industrial noise levels with faint upper atmosphere density increases. The data was subtle but consistent. The structure above Earth had not arrived recently. It had been forming for generations, feeding invisibly on every engine, every explosion, every cry launched skyward. Human civilization had been building its body. Chapter 29, The Revelation. A coalition of scientists broadcast an unauthorized livestream before authorities could silence it. Their conclusion was calm, clinical, and devastating. The membrane was not a predator in the traditional sense. It was embryonic. Earth existed inside a gestational cavity, an energy-rich environment saturated with vibration. Over centuries, the accumulating acoustic and electromagnetic output of humanity had accelerated its growth. We were not beneath an invasion. We were inside an incubation. An incubation implies one inevitable outcome: birth. Chapter 30, The Choice. The pulse accelerated to 2 seconds. Of buildings groaned continuously now. The membrane hovered less than 10 meters above parts of central China. In some regions, it brushed mountaintops. Li Wei stood in the street with thousands of others, staring upward at the faintly luminous tissue that had replaced the open sky. Above it, immense shadows shifted with increasing urgency. If it completed its growth, the rupture would not be localized, the gestational layer would tear completely, and whatever surrounded Earth would emerge fully into our atmosphere. A final emergency summit convened. 2 options were proposed: continue resisting, attack, disrupt, shout, and risk accelerating the birth. Or enforce global silence, total silence. Starve it. Li Wei understood then that humanity's greatest achievement, its endless noise, had been nourishment, and now survival depended on the unthinkable. The entire planet would have to become quiet. Chapter 31, The Quiet Order. The directive was named Operation Stillness. Within hours, broadcasts across China instructed citizens to power down non-essential electronics. Factories shut their gates. Highways emptied. Bullet trains coasted to silent halts. Power stations reduced output to minimal life support levels. For the first time in modern history, megacities dimmed voluntarily. Shanghai's skyline went dark floor by floor. Beijing's ring roads fell silent. In Hangzhou, Li Wei stood in a city that felt ancient again, stripped of engines, stripped of machinery, stripped of hum. Only footsteps remained, and breathing. The pulse above continued every 2 seconds, but it no longer accelerated. It waited. Chapter 32, Withdrawal. Days passed in unnatural calm. Without industrial vibration, the membrane's descent slowed. Measurements showed marginal stabilization at 8 meters above ground in most regions. The bioluminescent veins above flickered erratically now, as though deprived. Coastal waters, once rising, began to settle back. Tidal anomalies weakened. The gravitational shift plateaued. It was starving, but starvation brought agitation across the underside of the membrane. Massive contractions rippled, continent-long spasms that distorted the air and made mountains groan. Night. The shadows beyond the translucent tissue thrashed faintly. Whatever was gestating was not passive. It was reacting. Chapter 33, The Cost of Silence. Silence at planetary scale came with consequences. Hospitals struggled on reduced power. Food supply chains fractured without transport. Digital communication became sparse and rationed. Satellites were powered down to minimize emissions, people spoke in whispers even indoors, irrationally afraid that sound alone could feed the sky. Li Wei walked through Hangzhou's West Lake District where usually music drifted across the water. Now there were only soft footsteps and wind confined beneath the membrane. Children were told not to shout, infants were comforted quickly. A civilization that once equated noise with progress now treated quiet as survival, and slowly, the pulse stretched from 2 seconds to 3. Chapter 34, Convulsions. The reprieve did not last. On the 12th day of global silence, the membrane convulsed violently without warning. A rupture tore open above Central Asia, wider than the previous tear in Chongqing. Through it, humanity saw movement at incomprehensible scale, layered structures unfolded like petals. Vast tendrils flexed, each larger than provinces. Light pulsed along organic corridors stretching upward into darkness. The being was not small. The earth was not even a chamber. It was a cell. Of the convulsion sent shockwaves downward. The membrane dropped half a meter instantly, crushing upper floors in several cities. Starvation was weakening it, but weakness made it desperate. Chapter 35, The final equation. In a dim operations room lit by battery backup, scientists delivered the final assessment. Silence could delay maturation. It could not reverse it. Enough energy had already been absorbed over decades to complete development. Starvation only prolonged the inevitable and increased instability. There was one theoretical alternative. If a single, concentrated, planet-scale sonic event were generated, precisely tuned to the membrane's resonant frequency, it might trigger premature detachment, not birth. A miscarriage. The risk was absolute. The counterforce could shatter Earth's crust. Oceans could boil from vibrational feedback. Humanity might extinguish itself, but if nothing was done, the gestation would complete, and whatever enclosed the planet would open fully. Li Wei listened as the room fell silent again. Humanity had two choices: whisper into extinction. Or scream once, together, and hope the sky would tear away forever. Chapter 36, Resonance. The plan required precision beyond anything humanity had attempted. Every remaining power source across the planet would be synchronized for a single discharge: hydroelectric dams, geothermal plants, emergency reactors, decommissioned launch platforms, even dormant military arrays. The sound would not be heard in the traditional sense. It would be constructed, a layered resonance tuned exactly to the membrane's measured frequency. A harmonic inversion. If calculated correctly, the energy would not feed the organism. It would destabilize its structure. Li Wei volunteered at the Hangzhou grid station, monitoring one of thousands of nodes preparing for the event. The city around him was ghost-like, silent towers beneath a living ceiling that now hovered barely 5 meters above the tallest streets. Above, the membrane quivered continuously. The pulse had slowed to 5 seconds. It felt almost patient. Chapter 37, The descent. On the final day, the boundary dropped again 0.3 meters. In some districts, it brushed treetops and street signs. People could see its texture clearly now: fibrous strands woven through translucent tissue, glowing faintly blue with internal circulation. When touched gently with insulated poles, it flexed and recoiled, warm, alive through thinning patches. Enormous shapes shifted in the vastness beyond. Not one being, but many, interconnected, layered in impossible architecture. Earth was not inside a single creature. It was embedded within a colossal biomechanical expanse. A nursery among countless others, and something beyond the membrane was beginning to turn toward us. Chapter 38, The Scream. At precisely 1900 hours Beijing time, the resonance event began. Power surged through every synchronized system. Massive transducers buried in remote regions activated simultaneously. Subsonic arrays along coastlines vibrated. The ocean itself. For 1 second, the world held its breath, then the planet screamed. The sound was not audible in air, the membrane swallowed that instantly. But the constructed resonance traveled through ground, water, steel, bone. Li Wei felt his vision fracture as vibration tore through the city. Concrete rippled. Windows liquefied into glittering dust. Mountains across western China split with thunderless cracks. Above, the membrane reacted. Instead of absorbing, it amplified. Chapter 39, The Tear of Heaven. The harmonic inversion cascaded through the organism like a shock through fragile glass. Light ignited across its veins in violent overexposure. The translucent tissue lost coherence, fibrils snapping apart in expanding rings. Then the sky tore completely. Not a small rupture. A continental fracture stretching horizon to horizon. For the first time, humanity saw beyond the gestational layer. It was not empty space. It was an immense lattice of living structures spanning cosmic distances, each enclosing worlds in varying stages of growth. Some membranes were dark and dormant, others glowed faintly. Earth's enclosure convulsed, destabilized by the resonance feeding back uncontrollably through its body, and then it detached, the membrane recoiled upward, shredding into incandescent fragments that evaporated into the vast biome above. The weight lifted instantly, gravity normalized, the pulse stopped, the sky opened. Chapter 40. After the silence, true sky returned gradually. Wind rose first, tentative, uncertain. Then birds, confused but alive, crossed open air no longer capped by flesh. Clouds moved freely for the first time in weeks. Cities were broken. Coastlines scarred. Millions were injured, but Earth remained intact. Above, at night, the stars looked different. Through telescopes, astronomers could see faint distant glows, other gestational membranes suspended across the universe. Countless and silent. Humanity had not destroyed the greater organism. It had escaped. One cell. Li Wei stood once more on his balcony in Hangzhou. The air carried sound upward again. Somewhere far above, something vast shifted, not in anger, not in pursuit, but in distant awareness. Perhaps other worlds would one day learn what Earth had learned. Civilization is vibration, vibration is nourishment, and silence, when chosen together, can change the structure of the sky. It wasn't the silence that terrified humanity in the beginning, it was what the silence was hiding. Now they knew. And for the first time since the sky went quiet, the world allowed itself to be loud again. The end.
If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next chapter, and share your thoughts in the comments below.